The Oilers passed a massive gut check in Vegas. This team is starting to show me something.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Victory Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Sarash. I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 stream sports podcast network. And on today's show, we are going to walk through that exhilarating 4-on-3 overtime win against the Vegas Golden Knights. We are going to start out with why that felt like a playoff game stylistically, what the teams were doing that was causing problems for the opposite. In our second segment, we'll talk a little bit about calculated risk, forechecking, forcing turnovers, and then in our final segment, we'll talk a little bit about the bigger picture, about how the standings are shaking out, how I think the Oilers would fare against the Golden Knights in a playoff series, and a whole lot more. So to get started, this was as good a game from a viewer perspective as you are going to get. There is star power abound on both sides. Vegas is getting closer to fully healthy. The Oilers without Draisaitl are definitely a bit of a wounded duck, but are not helpless. They are not a hapless team without their second best player. Tonight, the Oilers played about as good a game as they can with their current facilities against this caliber of opponent. All year, Vegas has had quirks. They have had a really funky power play where even though it's in the top 5, at least it was going into tonight's game, Jack Eichel hadn't scored on the power play all year. They have experimented with a 5-forward power play unit with Eichel, with Tomas Hertl, with Mitch Marner running the point, with Mark Stone, with Pavel Dorofeyev. They have really tried to find ways. That's a team that also has a top 5 penalty kill in the NHL, but one of the drawbacks of Bruce Cassidy coached hockey, and don't get me wrong, Bruce Cassidy is one of the 5 to 10 best coaches in the NHL. He went to a Cup final in Boston, won a President's Trophy in Boston. He won a Stanley Cup in Vegas. This is one of the more proven, established guys who has proven in multiple stops that he is an above-average coach, that his style of play works. What Bruce Cassidy tries to do to you, and we'll talk more about this in our second segment and our third segment, as a matter of fact, he wants to slow the game down. He does not want a lot of offense in both directions. He wants to really turn the game into a battle of execution. And for me, this game really comes down to just a handful of sequences. We're talking about broken plays. We're talking about set plays. The Bouchard overtime winner is a byproduct of having a perfectly drawn up play. In 3-on-3, you have real strategic advantages because there is so much open ice. The Oilers winning that faceoff alone, Connor McDavid winning that faceoff back cleanly, Savoy effectively running a pick to create space for Bouchard, it opens up that lane, and Bouchard is one of the best shooting defensemen in the NHL. His wrist shot doesn't get enough praise in comparison to that massive slapper. I get it. I know why. But man, you get that. You get the Savoy goal off of the McDavid feed. You get the McDavid breakaway goal. You get the Zach Hyman goal. And all of these are byproducts of broken plays. And I think that's really telling when you want to unpack how this game unfolds. We talk about it a lot in the postseason that teams, especially once you get to a second, third round or a cup final, it really comes down to execution because everybody's talented. Once you get to a certain point in the season, every single team is going to be able to roll 3 or 4 lines and 3 quality pairs. And the game is going to come down to which team's players are able to execute what they need to do better than the opposition. And you saw a very funky second period. You saw Mark Stone pickpocket McDavid. You saw Zach Hyman make a really nice play on the forecheck to ultimately set up another goal. And all of this is to say, in a game like this, where the margins are small, I know the shots on goal, the expected goals fell where they laid after this contest, but in the flow of the game, there was not a lot of room out there. And I know by the end of this game, especially the overtime and the heroic effort of the penalty kill, which we'll touch on in a second, it felt like this was an exciting back and forth high end game. For large swaths of the game, there just wasn't room. as much as McDavid tried to force pucks through the middle, as much as the Oilers at large tried to get to their cross-seam passes and their middle lane stuff, the deflections, those plays were not there. Vegas under Bruce Cassidy controls that center lane extremely well, and they are forcing you to play that puck on the perimeter. And the longer you spend out on that perimeter, the more you're going to have to work. And that really is the crux of the issue for the Oilers at large, because right now, especially without Leon, but even when Leon does come back, assuming he gets a game or two in the regular season before we go to the playoffs, assuming that happens, you are going to need to find a way to bring out the best in your supporting cast, because right now, the Oilers' season story has been McDavid do something, Draisaitl do something, and then the supporting cast sits there on the bench for 2 shifts at a time without getting their number called. And you have forward lines with 23 minutes, and you have forward lines with 9 minutes of game time. And that's not going to bear fruit in the long run. And the reason I tie the idea of effort and intensity to workload, there's a real calculation you're going to have to make if you want to play the style of hockey you saw in that second period. And Vegas is an extremely aggressive forechecking team. Defense starts on the forecheck. I know generally we would associate offense with forechecking because it's in the offensive zone and you can create scoring chances off of it, but it gives your defense time to set up. And in effect, you are preventing the other team from getting to offense, even though they are the ones who have the puck. Yes, they are technically on offense because they control possession, but they're not in the neutral zone skating with speed. They're not in your zone. By definition, we would generally say forechecking is an offshoot of offense, but the way this game plays out and the way this style of play often works itself out, it comes down to who has more energy, who has more tenacity. And so much of forecheck hockey and transition hockey is an attention to detail component. Are you speeding the other team up? And we're going to talk more about this in depth in the second segment, because this is one of the mechanics of hockey I find extremely interesting to evaluate and dissect, because it's hard to evaluate. You got to watch the games, you got to have the stat tracking data, and it really sets apart the good teams from the great teams, because you can have an extremely talented roster, but if the pieces don't fit, if you can't get those guys to play off of each other and to execute offensively, it becomes a real challenge to make your hockey work. You can have all the possession you want, but if your guys don't have that understanding of where they need to be, if your guys can't earn second, third, fourth scoring chances by sustaining a strong forecheck and staying off of defense, you're going to have a harder time. For a good stretch of this game, the Oilers were in as ice tilt a mode as you're going to get. The Golden Knights went something like 7 or 8 minutes in the third period without registering a shot on goal because of how tight defensively the Oilers were playing, how intense the defensive pressure was when Vegas would gain the zone. And Vegas is in such a weird place as a team with the amount of overtime losses they have, with the season they've had. I was talking about it with Hunter Hodes on the Thursday edition of Locked On NHL yesterday, and we both came to the same conclusion that this is a style problem. Not in terms of it's a bad style, but we keep waiting for Vegas to kind of have the light bulb go off and start to play the way we think a team with all of this talent should. And it's just not coming together. You know, it's March 27th at this point. If you're just waiting for a team to get it right for the first time all year with 10 regular season games to go, it's a really tough sell that they're just going to magically figure it out once the lights get a little bit brighter in the postseason. Now, this felt like a playoff game, and this had the feel, style-wise, and the intensity of a playoff game. We're going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to dive into a little bit more of the style battle and why this was such a back-and-forth affair right after this. We are in the throngs of the Sweet 16 with big games, tight spreads, momentum swings, and chances at history every single game. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's action to get in on. And now, FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits your read. You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. Then you can apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. My Johnnies, big game against Duke. Maybe we go to the Elite Eight for the first time in 30-something years. Go safe, go bold. Ride the team you've been with all season. It's your parlay after all. Now, just some more upside. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you so much to everybody that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. And you got to get in the Everydayer Club for the stretch run, man. We are counting down the games to the playoffs in mid-April. The Stanley Cup playoffs are only 3 weeks away. You want to be in that Discord server for the stretch run. You want ad-free episodes of the show for the stretch run. The link is down in the show notes. Get involved. As we continue our conversation and we really dive into the nuts and bolts, I got to give a massive, massive tip of the cap to the penalty kill in overtime. The effort from Nurse, Connor Murphy, and Nugent-Hopkins, 45 straight seconds, maybe more than that, probably closer to a minute straight of outright assault. The Golden Knights firing pucks from every which way, cross-seam passes, bob and weaves, drop passes, layered passes, intercepts, just anything Vegas wanted to do from a shot perspective, they could get in 4-on-3 with all of that space, with the sustained pressure, with the tired penalty killers. By the end of that penalty kill, when they started springing back the other way and Hyman got out of the penalty box, and real quick as an aside, Mark Stone went down way too easy. I know that's technically a penalty, but Stone stuck his arm on Hyman's stick and pulled him into a hook. It's overtime. I would have let them play. It worked out for the Oilers. Puck doesn't lie, but that annoyed me that was called a penalty in that situation in a game like this. But the Oilers, penalty kill in the overtime period with just a remarkable gut check. And Connor Ingram makes the great poke check. Vegas tries to run the jam play, what we saw the Oilers run to great effect last year in the playoffs when Corey Perry and Zach Hyman were dominating at the net front on the man advantage. That jam play where you have the attacking player receive the puck with his back to the goalie, and all he's got to do is swing to his forehand and sweep the puck along. It's a really dangerous play for attacking teams. It's hard to do in 5-on-4. It's really tricky to occupy that space without eating cross checks from the defenseman closest to you or the goalie trying to get you out of their way in that respect. But the Oilers got themselves a really hard-earned victory tonight. And the work they were able to do, especially defensively, especially on the forecheck, is not to be overlooked. And I have been begging this team for weeks now, and months now, find an identity. I don't really care how it manifests, but you need to be able to execute a certain style of play on a consistent basis so that you can start to build progress. You need to understand who plays with who and why they work together. Now, this game had a little bit of everything. You had the after the whistle stuff at the end of the first period where Nurse and Howden got into it, where Dickinson, after getting hit in the head, which that should have been a penalty, at the very least 2 minutes. If you wanted to say not intent to injure, not a match penalty, fine. But that was a really dangerous hit. And Dickinson, I'm very grateful, was able to stay in the game. He won the faceoff to start the overtime period. And I really like what Jason Dickinson has in his toolbox as a player. I wish there was a bit more puck skill, but he is really consistent in winning faceoffs. He went 7 for 11 on the dots tonight. And faceoffs are overvalued in the general conversation, especially because they're all rated as equal when we lop them all into one big box as opposed to offensive zone, defensive zone, neutral zone, special teams. You get what I'm saying here. There are value to faceoffs, but some of them are significantly more valuable than others. And continuing that idea, the idea of playoff style hockey. Number one, especially in that first period, you saw a real reticence to go forward. Very reminiscent of what you would see in the early stages of a soccer match. And soccer and hockey don't have a lot in common beyond the occasional strategic overlap where the principle is the same, but because the number of players is so different, 11 versus 5, it's really tricky to draw direct one-to-ones. But when you have to really build up offensively, where getting into the final third of a soccer pitch and getting into that high danger area of a hockey rink, they're really challenging. Because that team that's defending is going to make a concerted effort to close you out of there. they're going to let you take all the shots you want from outside the 18-yard box the same way in hockey. You want to take point shots with traffic, with shooters under duress, by all means, go for it. We think our goalie, as long as he's got a decent sight line on it, is going to be able to make that play. Similar to what we say in soccer. If we run that heavy low block where we're dropping 7 or 8 of our 10 guys and we're saying get it over us or sending crosses, it's the same thing. It is the exact same principle in these defense-first hockey games. And as it starts to open up, you start to see that adventure start to creep in. You start to see guys get a little risky. And that's where the game really took off in the second period, where you had Stone make the plays he did on the 2 goals he scored, Hyman forcing the turnover and scoring his goal. Those are examples. The Spring goal, where the Oilers go back the other way on the counter, the McDavid goal where they get the 3-on-1, that's an example of what I'm talking about, of reading the situation, taking advantage when it comes. And you really have to make a conscious decision. It really does come down to execution and effort when we're talking about transition play, because you only have so much energy. If you're going to get average NHL shift is between 30 and 45 seconds. Anything longer than that, you are a star player on your team and your coach will allow you to take that extra beat. But for the most part, we're trying to get in and out. We want to be as fresh as possible with as much energy as possible, as constantly as possible. It's one of the real evolutions over time. Shifts back in the day, when we're talking about the early primitive stages of contemporary hockey in the 40s and 50s, we're talking about 3 or 4 minute shifts with a lot of gliding, not a lot of striding, and a game played at a significantly slower pace. But as the speed of the game ramps up, the more finite your energy is, the more players you need, the more opportunities there are to play, the more the game becomes specialized, the more you want to get turnover, because those energy bursts are so valuable. That's where you have an advantage. If you get fresh guys out there against guys who have been out there for 40 seconds or so, and you can prolong that cycle and get more advantageous offensive or draw a penalty the way Vegas was able to in the overtime, and the penalty wasn't drawn, obviously, in the 4-on-3, but you get advantageous situations and good things happen. And it's really an interesting way to look at the game, because this one in particular, you probably make an argument Vegas should have won. They had that power play in overtime, and they had 2 or 3 really good chances, and Connor Ingram made some really nice plays in net. The Oilers' penalty kill showed a lot of guts, a lot of gumption, being able to stand in there and block those shots, and the willingness to play like that. And to tie a bow on this thought of a playoff game, the style of play, what worked, what didn't, if you're going to play this way, where the forecheck is running like a buzzsaw, we're dive bombing those defensemen trying to force turnovers, it does become a matter of survival. Because if you're going to dive bomb on the forecheck full tilt and try and force that defender to make a play before they're ready, you're probably going to have to come off right after that. And that doesn't sound great, especially when the Oilers' best forecheckers, Podkolzin and Zach Hyman, are guys who are going to be on the first or second line. And you want those guys out there for a minute or so if you can manage it, especially if they can turn their skills into offensive zone time. And offensive zone time in of itself does not necessarily guarantee offense, but the more time you spend in the offensive zone, the less defense you are playing. The more time you spend in the offensive zone, the more likely you are to maybe force a mistake. And these are all little things. And that's the beautiful thing about hockey. We play 12 forwards, we play 6 defensemen, we play a goalie. Everybody can do a little part in winning a game. And I felt the Oilers gave as good a team effort as they've had in a long time tonight in a really difficult game. Vegas was very on the nose tonight. Vegas very much could have won this game. Speaking of, we're going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll dive into why this game was important, the playoff race, and a whole lot more right after this. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inboxes overflowing, and the one position you have to fill, well, it's still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, and location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And the stat that says it all, In the minute I've been talking to you, companies just like yours will make 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed's worldwide data. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, that's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help you get the premium status your job deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. One more time, Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Victory Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, making it their first listen of the day. And this time of year, cliche as it sounds, every game is a playoff game. And even when you're playing non-conference opponents, last weekend you played Tampa Bay, that's an opportunity. And every single one of these games has weight now. Every single one, even the non-conference ones, even the ones against non-playoff teams. Going into the weekend, the Oilers are in a position now where they are 5 points back of the Ducks. The Oilers have 9 games remaining. The Ducks have 10. The Oilers, more likely than not, will not be able to make up that 5-point gap with Anaheim unless Anaheim goes on a bit of a cool spell. Anaheim pulled the game they were in on Thursday night against the Flames out of their butts. They scored an overtime goal with 1 second remaining, Mikael Granlund to complete a hat trick. And the Oilers sit at 81 points. They have a little bit of room to Vegas, who is 2 points back. The Kings are 5 points back. The Kraken, who won against Tampa Bay, are 7 points back. With that rough envelope math in the back of your head, we're looking at the cut line being about 92, 93 points for one of the Pacific Division playoff spots. You might be able to get one of the 2 wild cards at 91 or 90 points perhaps. But as I said earlier in the week, I said it on Locked On NHL with Hunter, as a team like Edmonton, who only has 9 games to go, and some of the teams you're in competition with for playoff spots have 10 or 11 to go, you do not want to leave points on the table. And what I mean by that, you're going to lose. The Oilers are not going to win the final 9 regular season games of the year. I would be very surprised if they were able to do that. With that in mind, you are going to lose 1 or 2 of these games. Your hope, if you're Edmonton, and your objective is to get as many points as possible out of these final 9 games so that once you're done, once you've played your game 82 and Vegas is playing their game 82 the day or two after you're done with your season, the game Vegas is playing doesn't determine your future. It is the worst feeling in all of sports, where you have left meat on the bone and your destiny is not in someone else's hands. Occasionally, it bears fruit in a really exciting way, like a couple of years ago, that one Penguins-Islanders game got the Panthers into the playoffs, and the Panthers made it to the Stanley Cup final. Blackhawks, excuse me. Penguins-Blackhawks. What am I talking about? There was a Blackhawks-Penguins game in the 2023 season that, because whoever won the game, it kept Florida alive. Florida ultimately got the 8th seed. They went to the Stanley Cup final that year against Vegas and lost, obviously, but really kind of kickstarted Florida as a Stanley Cup caliber team. And you don't want to be that team. You don't want to have to rely on the outlier. Wildcard teams make the Stanley Cup final from time to time. It happens. The last team to win the Stanley Cup from what would have been one of the wildcard / 7-8 spots in the old format were the Kings in 2012 when they beat the Devils. We're talking about a once in a decade type situation. And we have yet to see a team from a wildcard position win the Stanley Cup in the 2020s. It happened last decade. Like I said, the Kings did it once. We've seen teams make the Cup final from one of those spots, but the path is challenging. And if you are Edmonton, your objective, as simple as possible, you want to be the 2 or the 3 seed. You saw last year, the Oilers are perfectly capable of winning in the postseason without home ice. They won the first 3 playoff series last year without it. They went on the road and beat LA in the first round. They beat Vegas. They beat Dallas. All of those as the 3 seed, the lower seed in the division, played the cards as they were dealt and took care of their business. Now, with only 9 games to go, each of those games has quite a bit of weight to it. And you're looking at an Oilers team that is starting to figure out what it wants to be, and it's going to be a challenge. We talked about it earlier in the week, the idea of being a defense, game control, slow it down. So you won against Vegas. You got Anaheim tomorrow night on Saturday, a late night. You got Seattle early next week. You might be able to close Seattle's season right there. Chicago, that's a nice break. You get your finale against Vegas. You get Utah again. You get San Jose, who looks to be out of it now. They've fallen a bit off the pace. The Kings, who aren't out of it but need some help. The Avalanche, who have all but tied up the number 1 seed. And then Vancouver. You've got 2 cupcakes in there in Vancouver and Chicago. Vancouver has been in Cancun mode for 3 months at this point. But your second game, your next Vegas game, and your Anaheim game, those are probably going to determine your season. And I don't mean that in terms of if you're going to win the Stanley Cup. You need to take care of your business. And Anaheim has given the Oilers all types of fit defensively, all types of fits in net, where the Oilers have conceded a ton of goals in the games. And Anaheim is an offense first, ask questions later type team. Anaheim's defense is not very good. Lukas Dostal, though talented, has not put up great numbers this year. All of this is to say, if you are the Edmonton Oilers, you are starting to figure out what you need to do. You're playing decent hockey. Now, look, I know you won tonight. You won against Utah the other night, but you lost to Tampa and Florida. You lost to Florida pretty badly. The San Jose win feels pretty good in hindsight. But recently, the Oilers have been up and down, just like they've been all year. They're 6-4-1 in their last 11 games, which is decent. And then you throw in tonight's win, so 7-6-1 in their last 12. But you want these moments to feel like they're amounting to something. And I felt like the Oilers stumbled across something a little bit tonight. And it's not easy. This type of hockey, the aggressive forecheck, the heavy cycle, the high to low, it is cumbersome. It is tiresome. It wears you down even though you are on offense. It takes a lot of discipline to play this style of hockey consistently, and we've seen the Oilers flirt with it over the last 2 years. It's the best hockey they've played this year is when they've pursued this type of game, and it's going to be a challenge to sustain over the next 9 regular season games. But if you want to lock things up, 6 of the final 9. You win 6 of the final 9 games, you will absolutely 100% make the playoffs. You win 5 out of the final 9, you almost certainly will make the playoffs. You only win 4, that's where it starts to get dicey. That's where we're talking about maybe you're in one of the wild card spots and you do not want to have to go into the gauntlet that is the Central Division. You really would like to avoid going on the road for 3 straight rounds. You can do it, but again, like we were talking about, just because you can do it doesn't mean you need to. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL Game Night. Go relive the win over the Golden Knights. If you're watching over on YouTube, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On YouTube channel. Check out the Everydayer Club. The link is down in the show notes. Get in the mix. Join the conversation. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Until then, let's go Oilers.